The champagne glass shattered against $3 million of history. Silence. Then panic. Wealthy donors scrambling. The gallery director frozen in horror as the priceless painting began to bleed alcohol into a 400-year-old canvas. That's when she stepped forward. A black waitress. Invisible 30 seconds ago. Now staring at the dying masterpiece with the calm of a surgeon. "I can fix that." Laughter erupted. Someone muttered, "She probably cleans toilets." They had no idea who she really was. What she'd walked away from 3 years ago. Or why her hands, those overlooked, underestimated hands, held the power to save what everyone else had already declared dead. By sunrise, the entire city would know her name. And nothing would ever be the same. This is her story. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comment section where you are watching from, because tomorrow I'll be giving you an interesting story such as this one and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The champagne glass hit the floor first. A sharp, crystalline crack that froze every conversation in the Hale Gallery. Then came the liquid, arcing through the air like a golden curse, splashing across the Madonna in repose. A 17th-century masterpiece worth $3 million. The Virgin's serene face began to weep champagne. Silence swallowed the room. Julian Hale watched the liquid seep into the canvas, his mind blank with horror. The painting had been his mother's pride, the centerpiece of her legacy, and now it was bleeding alcohol onto 200-year-old linen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Oh God!" Richard Langley, the man who'd stumbled into the waiter, pressed his palms to his temples. "Oh my God, Julian, I'm so sorry. Someone call a restorer." A woman in diamonds shrieked. "Now! The nearest specialist is in Boston." "That'll take hours. The paint is lifting. Look at it, it's lifting." Panic crackled through the crowd like static. Phones came out. People backed away from the painting as if it might explode. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step forward, hand outstretched, but he didn't know what to do. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't trained for any of this. And then, cutting through the chaos like a blade, "I can fix that." The voice was calm, steady, almost quiet. Every head turned. A black woman stood near the refreshment table, still holding a silver tray. Her uniform was plain, her apron slightly wrinkled. She wasn't young, maybe late 40s, with natural hair pulled back in a low bun and eyes that didn't blink, didn't flinch. She was looking at the painting the way a surgeon looks at a wound. Not panic. Assessment. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone laughed. It started as a chuckle from the back of the room, then spread nervous, disbelieving laughter that rippled through the crowd like a wave. "Did she just? Is she serious? Who let the help speak?" Richard Langley's face flushed red. "Miss, this is not the time." "I can fix it," she repeated, setting the tray down on a nearby table. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need to shout. "But not if you keep standing there letting the champagne soak deeper." Julian blinked. Something in her tone, calm, authoritative, certain, cut through his paralysis. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. She wasn't guessing. She knew. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Someone who knows what she's doing." She took a step toward the painting, and immediately 2 security guards moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, step back. Don't touch the artwork." "Julian." Richard grabbed his arm, voice low and sharp. "You can't seriously be considering this. She's a waitress." Julian hesitated. The room was watching him. The board members, the donors, the press. His mother's voice echoed in his head. Don't let them intimidate you. Do what's right. But what was right? The woman didn't move. She just stood there, hands at her sides, waiting. Not begging. Not pleading. Just waiting. What's your name? Julian asked. Celeste. Celeste. He swallowed. Have you worked with paintings before? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Yes. Where? She didn't answer. Just looked at the Madonna, where champagne was now pooling in the cracked glaze, seeping into the Virgin's robes. You're running out of time. Every second you wait, the damage gets worse. The alcohol is breaking down the varnish. In 10 minutes, it'll reach the original paint layer. And then no one, not even the best restorer in the world, will be able to save it. Richard scoffed. This is insane. Let her try, Julian said. The room erupted. Julian, you can't. She's a waitress. This is a $3 million painting. And it's dying. Julian's voice cracked through the noise, surprising even himself. He looked at Celeste, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the resignation, as if she'd expected this. As if she'd been dismissed so many times it didn't even hurt anymore. But beneath that, he saw something else. Certainty. If you can fix it, he said quietly, then fix it. Celeste held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, stepped forward, and knelt in front of the painting. The room held its breath. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a clean white cloth. Her hands, steady, practiced, began to blot the champagne with a precision that silenced every whisper. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, almost reverent. Julian watched, transfixed. The crowd watched, speechless. And Celeste Armand, once the most celebrated art restorer in the world, now invisible in a server's uniform, began to do what she'd sworn she'd never do again. She began to heal. Celeste's hands moved like they were conducting a symphony only she could hear. The room remained silent. No one dared breathe too loudly. She blotted the champagne with methodical precision, her cloth absorbing the liquid before it could sink deeper into the canvas. Each dab was careful, calculated. She worked from the outside in, creating a barrier, preventing the alcohol from spreading further across the Virgin's face. Julian crouched beside her, close enough to see the concentration etched into her features. What are you doing? Stabilizing, she murmured, not looking up. The champagne's already compromised the varnish layer. If I don't remove it now, it'll eat through to the original paint. How do you know? Because I've done this before. Her voice was quiet, almost absent, as if she were speaking to herself. Florence, 2011. A tourist knocked a bottle of wine onto a Botticelli. I had 45 minutes to save it. Julian's breath caught. You were in Florence? She didn't answer. Her hands kept moving. Richard Langley pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. Julian, this is madness. We need professionals. She is a professional, Julian said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. She's a... Watch. Julian pointed at Celeste's hands. Just watch. Celeste had set the cloth aside and was now examining the damage under the gallery's bright lights, tilting her head, her eyes tracing every crack, every discoloration. She reached into her apron again and pulled out a small penlight, the kind surgeons use, and shone it across the surface. You carry that in your apron? Someone whispered. Celeste ignored them. She was counting something under her breath, her lips barely moving. Then she stood abruptly. I need distilled water, cotton swabs, and mineral spirits. Non-acetone. Do you have a conservation lab here? Julian nodded quickly. Downstairs. I can. Show me. She started walking, and Julian scrambled to follow. The crowd parted instinctively, their earlier laughter replaced by something else. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of respect. Richard grabbed Julian's arm as he passed. If she damages that painting further, it's on you. Julian pulled free. If I don't let her try, it's already destroyed. The conservation lab was small, tucked in the gallery's basement, lined with shelves of chemicals, brushes, and equipment. Celeste moved through it like she'd been there 100 times. She found the distilled water, the swabs, and a bottle of mineral spirits. Her hands were steady as she prepared a solution, measuring precisely, testing the pH with a strip of paper. You've done this before, Julian said, more a statement than a question. Yes. Where? She paused, her back to him. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly. Everywhere. The Uffizi. The Louvre. The Met. I restored paintings for 20 years. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. Then why are you serving champagne to people who don't see me? She turned, and the exhaustion in her eyes was staggering. Because I needed to disappear. And this was the best way to do it. Why would you want to disappear? Her jaw tightened. She looked away, back at the solution she was preparing. Because some mistakes you can't restore. The words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Julian wanted to ask more, but something in her posture, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her hands gripped the table, told him not to push. Not yet. Can you really save it? He asked instead. She looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not confidence. Something deeper. Desperation. I don't know, she whispered. But I have to try. They returned to the main gallery, Celeste carrying a small tray of supplies. The crowd had thinned slightly, but those who remained watched her like hawks. Phones were out now, recording. A journalist from the art forum was scribbling notes. Celeste knelt in front of the Madonna again. She dipped a cotton swab into the solution and began to clean the surface, removing the champagne residue in slow, deliberate strokes. The Virgin's face started to emerge again, the paint beneath still intact. Cracked, but intact. Julian watched her work, mesmerized. There was something almost sacred in the way she touched the canvas, as if she were cradling something precious, something alive. Who taught you? He asked softly. My father. Her voice was distant, lost in memory. He was a restorer in Haiti before we came to the States. He used to say, every painting has a soul, Celeste. And our job is to make sure it keeps breathing. He sounds like a wise man. He was. She swallowed hard. He died believing I'd carry on his legacy. You are. She shook her head, her hands never stopping. No. I buried it. Along with everything else. Julian frowned. What do you mean? But before she could answer, a voice cut through the room. Sharp, cold, and final. That's enough. Richard Langley stood at the center of the gallery, flanked by 2 board members. His expression was granite. Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the painting. Security is escorting you out. Celeste froze, swab in hand. Julian shot to his feet. Richard, she's saving it. She's a liability, Richard snapped. We have no idea who this woman is. No credentials, no insurance. If anything happens to that painting, we're liable. She leaves. Now. 2 security guards stepped forward. Celeste stood slowly, setting the swab down with trembling hands. She looked at the painting, half-cleaned, still fragile, and something in her expression shattered. She'd almost let herself hope. She turned to Julian, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." And then she walked toward the door. Julian stood frozen, torn between the board, the crowd, and the woman disappearing into the shadows. And he hated himself for not knowing what to do. Have you ever been stopped right when you were about to prove yourself? How did it feel? Drop your thoughts below. I'm reading every single one. Celeste pushed through the gallery's glass doors and into the cold night air. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline that came from touching a canvas again after so long. For a few brief minutes, she'd felt alive. Whole. Like the woman she used to be. Now she just felt foolish. What were you thinking? She asked herself, peeling off her apron and balling it in her fists. You really thought they'd let you finish? You really thought they'd see you? She'd been invisible for 3 years. She'd chosen it. Needed it. After Amara died, after the funeral where she couldn't even look at her own reflection, she dismantled her entire life piece by piece. Changed her phone number. Moved from Brooklyn to a tiny apartment in Queens. Took a job serving people who would never recognize her face from the art journals that had once celebrated her. It was safer this way. Easier. But tonight, tonight, she'd felt the pull again. The need to create, to fix, to matter. And they'd laughed at her. She walked fast, her breath misting in the November air, trying to outrun the humiliation burning in her chest. Inside, Julian stood in the center of the gallery, staring at the half-cleaned Madonna. The champagne residue was gone from the left side of the Virgin's face, revealing the luminous paint beneath. But the right side remained damaged, the varnish clouded, the cracks deepening. It was dying. Slowly. Visibly. Julian. Richard's voice was sharp. I've already called the head of conservation at the Met. She'll be here first thing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. Julian turned to him, incredulous. Richard, you heard what she said. Every minute we wait, the damage gets worse. She's a waitress, Richard hissed, stepping closer. We don't know anything about her. No portfolio, no references, no credentials. For all we know, she could have made it worse. Look at it. Julian gestured at the painting. Does that look worse to you? Richard's jaw tightened. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point, Richard said slowly, dangerously, is that this gallery has a reputation to uphold. We don't let random staff members perform emergency surgeries on priceless art. If the press finds out we let some... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Some untrained woman touch that painting. We'll be a laughingstock. Julian felt something cold settle in his stomach. You mean if they find out we let a black woman touch it? Richard's face flushed. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The two men stared at each other. Around them, the remaining guests pretended not to listen, but Julian could feel their eyes, their judgment. He thought of his mother, of the way she'd built this gallery on the principle that art belonged to everyone, that it wasn't just for the wealthy and the powerful. She would have let Celeste finish. She wouldn't have hesitated. But his mother wasn't here. And Julian had spent 2 years trying to prove he was worthy of her legacy without ever really believing it himself. Fine, he said quietly. We'll wait for the conservator from the Met. Richard nodded, satisfied. Good. Now let's get everyone out of here before this turns into more of a disaster. Julian watched him walk away, and the cold in his stomach turned to nausea. 20 minutes later, Julian stood alone in the empty gallery. The guests were gone. The lights were dimmed. The Madonna hung on the wall like an accusation. He pulled out his phone and stared at it. He didn't have Celeste's number. Didn't even know her last name. But he had to find her. Had to apologize. Had to. What? Beg her to come back? Risk his position, his reputation, everything his mother had built, for a woman he'd met an hour ago? But she'd been right. About the painting. About the damage. About everything. And he'd let them throw her out. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Met conservator confirmed for 9 a.m. Lock up and go home. We'll deal with the rest tomorrow. Julian typed back. What if there's no painting left to conserve by tomorrow? No response. He pocketed his phone, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. He didn't know where Celeste lived. Didn't know how to find her. But he knew someone who might. Celeste sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at her hands. They still smelled faintly of mineral spirits. Her apartment was small, cluttered with books on art history and restoration techniques she'd collected over the years but never opened. In the corner, covered by a sheet, stood her old easel. She hadn't looked at it in 3 years. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Probably the catering company, asking why she'd left early. It buzzed again. She picked it up, frowning at the unfamiliar number. This is Julian Hale from the gallery. I need to talk to you. Please. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the delete button. Then another text came through. You were right. About everything. And I was wrong. Please let me make this right. Celeste closed her eyes. She should ignore it. Should block the number, go to bed, forget this night ever happened. But something in those words, you were right, cracked something open inside her. No one had said that to her in years. Her fingers moved before she could stop them. The painting has maybe 6 hours before the damage becomes irreversible. You need someone tonight. Not tomorrow. 3 dots appeared. Then come back. Please. I'll make sure no one stops you this time. Celeste's heart hammered. She thought of the Madonna, half cleaned, half dying. She thought of her father's voice. Every painting has a soul, Celeste. She thought of Amara, 7 years old, asking if she could fix paintings when she grew up. Baby, you can do anything. Her hands trembled as she typed. I'll be there in 30 minutes. But I have conditions. Anything. No one watches. No cameras. No board members. Just you and me. A pause. Then, deal. Celeste stood, grabbed her coat, and opened the closet she hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside, carefully packed, was her restoration kit. Brushes, solvents, pigments, tools she'd once wielded like extensions of her own body. She pulled it out, felt its familiar weight. And for the first time since Amara died, Celeste Armand let herself believe she might still be worth something. The gallery was dark when Celeste arrived, only a few safety lights glowing along the baseboards. Julian waited by the front entrance, his tie loosened, his face etched with exhaustion and something else. Guilt, maybe. Relief. He opened the door before she could knock. You came, he breathed. I almost didn't. Celeste stepped inside, her restoration kit heavy in her hands. She was still wearing her uniform, but she'd changed into comfortable shoes. Her hair was down now, natural curls framing her face. Without the apron, without the forced invisibility, she looked different. Stronger. Julian locked the door behind her. Thank you. I know I don't deserve. You don't, she said simply, walking toward the Madonna. But the painting does. He followed her, watching as she set her kit down and knelt in front of the canvas. Even in the dim light, the damage was visible. The right side of the Virgin's face still clouded with champagne residue, the cracks spiderwebbing across her robes. Celeste leaned close, examining it with her penlight. Her jaw tightened. It's worse. The varnish is starting to separate from the paint layer. Can you still save it? She didn't answer immediately. Just kept staring, calculating. Finally. Maybe. But it's going to take all night. Then I'll stay. She glanced at him. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He pulled over a chair and sat down, his voice quiet but firm. I should have fought harder for you earlier. I should have told Richard to go to hell. I didn't. So the least I can do is stay and watch you prove every single one of them wrong. Something flickered in Celeste's eyes. Surprise, maybe gratitude. She turned back to the painting. Then stay quiet. I need to concentrate. Deal. For the first hour, she worked in silence. She cleaned the remaining champagne residue with careful, precise strokes, her cotton swabs turning brown as they absorbed decades of grime and fresh damage. Julian watched, mesmerized by the methodical rhythm of her hands. Every movement was deliberate, almost meditative. Where did you learn to do this? He asked softly. My father. She didn't look up. He apprenticed in Port-au-Prince under a master restorer. When we came to New York, he couldn't get licensed. His credentials didn't transfer. So he worked in museum basements, fixing paintings other people got credit for. That must have been hard. It was. She dipped a fresh swab in solution. But he never complained. He used to say, the work matters more than the name on the door. He taught me that art doesn't care about your title. It only cares if you can save it. Julian leaned forward. So you became a restorer. I became the best restorer. There was no arrogance in her voice, just fact. By the time I was 30, I was working with the Uffizi, consulting for the Louvre. I had a studio in Brooklyn, a waiting list 2 years long. She paused, her hand hovering over the canvas. I had everything. What happened? Her hand trembled. She set the swab down, closed her eyes. My daughter happened. And then. She didn't. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. Julian wanted to ask more, but something in the way she'd said it, the way her voice had cracked on the word didn't, told him to wait. Celeste took a shaky breath and picked up the swab again. Her name was Amara. She was 8. We were driving home from her school play. She'd played a sunflower, wore this ridiculous yellow costume she'd made herself. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. She was singing in the back seat, some song from the show. I turned to look at her, just for a second, just to see her face. She stopped. Julian's chest tightened. I didn't see the red light, Celeste whispered. The truck hit us from the side. Driver's side. She died instantly. God, Celeste. I walked away without a scratch. Her voice was hollow now, mechanical. Not a single broken bone. Just my daughter in a coffin and me standing at her funeral wondering why I was still breathing. Julian felt tears burn behind his eyes. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. I was her mother. I was supposed to protect her. Instead her voice broke. I killed her. No. Julian moved closer, kneeling beside her. An accident killed her. A terrible, horrific accident. But you didn't kill her. Celeste shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I couldn't touch a painting after that. Couldn't even look at one. Every time I tried, all I saw was her face. So I buried Celeste Armand. Let her disappear. Became someone no one would notice. No one would expect anything from. But you're here now. Because I'm weak, she whispered. Because I saw that painting dying and I couldn't walk away. That's not weakness. Julian's voice was fierce. That's who you are. You're a healer. You can't help it. She stared at him, something raw and vulnerable passing between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her phone buzzed. She broke eye contact, checked the screen, and her face went pale. "What is it?" Julian asked. She turned the phone toward him. It was a news alert. Hale Gallery in crisis. Priceless painting damaged. Mystery woman attempts restoration. Below it, a photo, grainy, taken on someone's phone, of Celeste kneeling in front of the Madonna earlier that night. And beneath that, the comments. Who is this woman? Why are they letting her touch it? This is what happens when galleries get desperate. Julian's stomach dropped. Celeste. They know. Her voice was shaking. By morning, every major outlet will be running this story. They'll dig into who I am, where I've been, why I disappeared. Maybe that's not. I can't do this. She stood abruptly, backing away from the painting. I can't be in the spotlight again. I can't have people asking questions, digging up Amara's death, turning her into a headline. Celeste, wait. I'm sorry. She grabbed her coat. I'm so sorry, but I can't. The painting, Julian said desperately. You're the only one who can save it. She looked at the Madonna, half restored, still fragile. Then at Julian. Then at the phone in her hand, the comments multiplying by the second. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. I can't, she whispered. And she walked toward the door. Julian didn't stop her this time. He just watched her go, his heart breaking, knowing he'd asked too much. The door clicked shut. And the Madonna wept in the darkness, still dying, still alone. Julian sat alone in the gallery, staring at the half-restored painting. The Virgin's face was split down the middle. One side luminous and clean, the other still clouded with damage. A metaphor, he thought bitterly. Half saved. Half destroyed. Just like Celeste. He pulled out his phone and typed her name into the search bar. Celeste Armand. The results flooded his screen. Celeste Armand, the prodigy who restored the impossible. Art Journal, 2019. Armand saves Botticelli after tourist incident in Florence. The Guardian, 2011. The Hands That Heal. An interview with master restorer Celeste Armand. The New York Times, 2018. Photo after photo showed a younger version of the woman he'd just met. Confident, radiant, standing beside masterpieces she'd brought back from the brink. In one image, she accepted an award in Florence, her smile bright and unguarded. In another, she worked on a canvas with the same intensity he'd witnessed tonight. Then the articles stopped. Abruptly. 3 years ago. He kept scrolling until he found it. Tragedy strikes renowned restorer. Daughter dies in car accident. Brooklyn Daily, 2022. Julian's throat tightened as he read. 8-year-old Amara Armand. School play. Intersection of Atlantic and Franklin. The other driver unharmed. The child pronounced dead at the scene. And then 6 months later. Where is Celeste Armand? Art World's golden child vanishes. He read the speculation, breakdown, grief, retirement. No one knew where she'd gone. She'd simply erased herself. Until tonight. Until a champagne glass shattered everything open again. Julian set his phone down and looked at the painting. Every painting has a soul, she'd said. And our job is to make sure it keeps breathing. But what about her soul? Who was making sure she kept breathing? He stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. Celeste's apartment was exactly what Julian expected. Small, sparse, a place designed for hiding. But what he didn't expect were the books. Everywhere. stacked on tables, piled on the floor, lining makeshift shelves. Art history, conservation techniques, restoration theory. She hadn't stopped learning. She'd just stopped practicing. She opened the door wearing an oversized sweater, her eyes red-rimmed. When she saw him, she started to close it. "Please," Julian said quickly. "Just 5 minutes. I told you. I know what you told me. And I looked you up." He held up his phone, showing her the articles. "I know who you are. What you were. What you gave up." Her jaw tightened. "Then you know why I can't come back. I know why you think you can't." He stepped closer. "But I also know that you're the only person who can save that painting. And I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think maybe you need to save it as much as it needs you." "You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me." His voice softened. "Help me understand." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then she stepped back, letting him inside. The apartment was cold. She hadn't turned on the heat. Julian sat on the edge of a worn couch while Celeste stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. "After Amara died," she began quietly, "I couldn't function. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Definitely couldn't work. Every time I looked at a painting, all I saw was her face. The way she'd sit in my studio, coloring while I restored. The way she'd ask questions. 'Mama, why is that lady crying in the painting? Mama, can you fix something that's really, really broken?' Her voice cracked. Julian stayed silent, letting her speak. I told her yes. I told her I could fix anything. She laughed bitterly. But I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. I couldn't bring her back. So I disappeared. Changed everything about my life. Took a job where no one would know my name, where I could just exist. Not feel. Not remember. Just survive." "But you didn't stop caring about art," Julian said gently. "No." She looked at the books surrounding them. "I couldn't. It's in my blood. My father's blood. Every time I served champagne at some gallery opening, part of me was dying to touch the paintings, to see them up close, to heal them." She turned to face him. "Tonight was the first time in 3 years I let myself try. And look what happened." "What happened," Julian said firmly, "is that you proved you're still exactly who you always were. A master. A healer. Someone who sees what others can't. And now the whole world is going to know I'm back. They're going to dig up Amara's death, turn it into a story, make it about tragedy and redemption and—" She pressed her hands to her face. "I can't let them turn my daughter into a headline." Julian stood, crossing to her. "What if it's not about them? What if it's about you? About proving to yourself that you can still create something beautiful, even after something so terrible?" She lowered her hands, tears streaming down her face. "What if I fail? What if you don't?" They stood in silence, the question hanging between them. Finally, Celeste walked to her closet and pulled out a box. Inside was a bracelet. Small, handmade, strung with painted beads. She held it up to the light. "Amara made this for me. Said it was magic. That whenever I wore it, I could fix anything." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I was wearing it the night of the accident. I haven't touched it since." Julian's chest ached watching her trace the beads with trembling fingers. "She believed in you," he said softly. "She believed you could fix anything." Celeste closed her eyes, fresh tears falling. "I don't know if I can." "Then let's find out together." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not pity. Not pressure. Just belief. Quiet, steady belief. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go save a painting." They returned to the gallery at 2 a.m., the city asleep around them. Julian unlocked the door, and they stepped into the darkness together. The Madonna waited, still half dying. But this time, Celeste didn't hesitate. She set down her kit, rolled up her sleeves, and let her hands remember what they were made for. Julian sat beside her, not speaking, just present. And slowly, carefully, she began to bring the masterpiece back to life. The hours blurred together like watercolors. Celeste worked with a focus Julian had never witnessed in anyone. Her hands moved across the canvas in whispers, blending, layering, coaxing the paint back to life. She mixed pigments on a small palette, matching colors so precisely that Julian couldn't tell where the damage ended and her restoration began. "How do you know which colors to use?" he asked, his voice low so as not to break her concentration. "Experience. And prayer." She didn't look up, but he heard the slight smile in her voice. Every painter has a signature. The way they mix their colors, the ratio of pigments to oil. This artist loved raw umber and lead white. You can see it in the shadows under the Virgin's chin, the highlights on the child's skin. "You can see all that? Can't you?" She glanced at him, and for the first time that night, there was warmth in her eyes. "Look closer." Julian leaned in, studying the canvas. At first, he saw only paint. But as his eyes adjusted, he began to notice what she meant. The subtle gradations of color, the way light seemed to glow from within the Virgin's face. "It's like, she's alive," he murmured. "That's the magic of it." Celeste's voice was soft, reverent. The painter didn't just create an image. He created a soul. And when something like that gets damaged, it's not just art that suffers. It's history. Memory. A piece of human longing frozen in time. Julian watched her work for another hour, mesmerized not just by her skill but by the transformation happening in front of him. She wasn't just restoring a painting. She was restoring herself. Around 4 a.m., she finally set down her brush and stretched, her neck cracking audibly. "Coffee," Julian offered, standing. "God, yes." He disappeared into the small staff kitchen and returned with 2 steaming mugs. They sat on the floor in front of the painting, their backs against the wall, shoulders almost touching. "Thank you," Celeste said, cradling the warmth between her palms, "for not giving up on me tonight. Thank you for coming back." Julian sipped his coffee. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Why this painting?" He gestured at the Madonna. "Of all the work you could have chosen to come back for, why this one?" Celeste was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the Virgin's face. "Because she's a mother. And I know what it's like to hold something precious and be terrified you'll lose it." Julian's throat tightened. "Every time I look at her," Celeste continued, "I see myself. The way she's holding that child. So gentle, but so tight. Like if she just holds on hard enough, nothing bad can ever happen." Her voice cracked. "But that's not how life works, is it? You can hold on with everything you have, and still, they slip away." Julian set down his coffee and turned to face her. "Celeste, what happened to Amara? That wasn't because you didn't hold on tight enough. Wasn't it?" She looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was raw, unguarded. "I was her whole world, Julian. And I failed her. 1 second of distraction, and she was gone. You didn't fail her. You loved her. And she knew that. How can you be so sure?" "Because of this." He gently touched the bracelet on her wrist, the painted beads catching the soft gallery light. "She made you something to remind you of your strength. That's not something a child does for a parent who failed them." That's something a child does for a parent they adore. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at the bracelet, tracing the beads the way she traced brushstrokes, with reverence, with memory. She used to sit in my studio for hours, she whispered. Never complained, never got bored. Just watched me work. And sometimes she'd say, "Mama, when I grow up, I want hands like yours. Hands that fix broken things." "She'd be proud of you tonight," Julian said quietly. "Seeing you do what you were born to do." Celeste wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging a bit of paint onto her cheek. Julian reached out instinctively and brushed it away with his thumb. The gesture was intimate, tender. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Julian," she breathed. "I see you," he said softly. "Not the waitress. Not the tragedy. Not the headlines. I see you. The woman who can bring dead things back to life. The woman who carries her daughter's memory like a torch. The woman who's braver than she knows." A tear slid down Celeste's cheek. "I don't feel brave. You came back. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." She held his gaze, and something shifted between them, a connection deeper than circumstance, more profound than a single night. It was recognition. Two broken people seeing themselves reflected in each other's wounds. "Tell me about your mother," Celeste said suddenly. "You said she built this gallery. What was she like?" Julian smiled, though sadness flickered behind it. "Fierce. Uncompromising. She believed art should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. She used to host free community nights, bring in local artists, teach kids how to look at paintings." He paused. "When she died, everyone said I should sell. That I wasn't ready to run a gallery. But I couldn't let it go. It was all I had left of her. And now? Now I realize I've been running it out of fear, not love. Trying to please the board, the donors, people like Richard, instead of asking what she would have done." He looked at the Madonna. "She would have let you finish the moment you offered. She wouldn't have hesitated." "Then be more like her," Celeste said gently. "Honor her by being brave." "Is that what you're doing? Being brave for Amara?" She considered this, her fingers absently touching the bracelet. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of being afraid." They sat in comfortable silence, the painting watching over them like a guardian. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to soften the darkness. "I think it's almost done," Celeste said, standing and examining her work. The Virgin's face was whole again, the cracks invisible, the colors vibrant and alive. Just a few final touches. She picked up her brush, and Julian watched as she made the last delicate strokes, a highlight here, a shadow there. When she finally stepped back, the transformation was complete. The Madonna in repose looked exactly as it had before the champagne fell. No better. More luminous. As if Celeste had breathed new life into centuries-old paint. "It's perfect," Julian whispered. Celeste stared at it, tears streaming down her face. "I did it," she breathed. "I actually did it." Julian stood beside her, his hand finding hers. Their fingers intertwined naturally, effortlessly. "You did more than fix a painting tonight," he said. "You proved you can come back from anything." She squeezed his hand, and for the first time in 3 years, Celeste Armand felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The sunrise painted the gallery in shades of gold and rose. They stood together, hand in hand, exhausted and exhilarated. "What happens now?" Celeste asked quietly. Julian turned to her, his expression serious. "Now we show the world what you've done. But only if you're ready." She looked at the painting, at the mother holding her child, eternal and unbreakable. Then she looked at the bracelet on her wrist. Hands that fix broken things. I'm ready, she whispered. The morning light streaming through the gallery windows felt like an interrogation lamp. Julian and Celeste stood before the restored Madonna, exhausted but triumphant, when the sound of the front door unlocking shattered their peace. Richard Langley entered first, followed by 3 board members and a woman Julian didn't recognize. Tall, imperious, carrying a leather case. The conservator from the Met. Richard stopped dead when he saw them. His face went from confusion to fury in seconds. What the hell is going on here? Richard, Julian stepped forward. Let me explain. You let her back in? Richard's voice echoed off the walls. After I explicitly told you. She saved it. Julian gestured at the painting. Look at it, Richard. It's perfect. The conservator moved closer, pulling out a magnifying loupe. She examined the canvas in silence, her expression unreadable. The board members whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking between Celeste and the painting. Celeste stood frozen, her restoration kit still at her feet, paint smudged on her hands. She looked small suddenly, vulnerable, like she wanted to disappear again. Remarkable work, the conservator said finally, straightening. Whoever did this is a master. The color matching is flawless. You can barely see where the damage was. She did it, Julian said, pride filling his voice. Celeste Armand. The conservator's eyes widened. Celeste Armand? The Celeste Armand? I thought she disappeared. I know. Richard's face was purple now. And now she's reappeared as our waitress, performing unauthorized restoration on a $3 million painting. Unauthorized. Julian's voice rose. The painting was dying. She saved it. That's not the point. Richard turned to the board members. Do you understand what this means? The liability? The insurance implications? She's not certified, not insured, not even properly employed by this gallery. She's one of the best restorers in the world, Julian shot back. She's a liability. Richard stepped closer to Julian, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Your mother built this gallery on trust, on reputation. If word gets out that we let some random staff member. Say it. Celeste's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. She stood straighter now, her exhaustion replaced by something harder. Say what you really mean, Richard. Some random black staff member. That's what you're afraid of, isn't it? Not the quality of my work. Not my credentials. You're afraid of what it looks like. Richard's jaw tightened. I'm afraid of lawsuits. Of scandal. Of a black woman being better at something than you expected her to be. Celeste's voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. I've dealt with men like you my entire career. Men who questioned my credentials, who asked if my father really taught me or if I stole techniques from real restorers. Men who paid me half what they paid my white colleagues and then acted surprised when I quit. This isn't about race. It's always about race. Her voice cracked. You laughed when I offered to help. You threw me out. And the only reason Julian called me back is because he was desperate. Not because he believed in me. Because he had no other choice. Julian flinched. The words landed like a physical blow because part of them was true. He had been desperate. He had hesitated. That's not fair, he said quietly. Isn't it? Celeste looked at him, and the betrayal in her eyes gutted him. When Richard told you to throw me out last night, you didn't fight hard enough. You let them make me feel small, invisible, worthless. Again. I came after you. After I'd already left. Tears spilled down her cheeks now. You want credit for doing the bare minimum? For finally seeing me as human after everyone else told you it was okay? The gallery fell silent. Even Richard seemed shocked into stillness. Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. Because she was right. He'd failed her when it mattered most. Celeste wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. I spent 3 years making myself invisible because I thought I deserved it. Because I couldn't save my daughter, so why should I save anything else? She looked at the Madonna, her voice breaking. But I saved that painting. I brought her back to life. And you know what? I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need this gallery's validation. I know what I'm worth. She grabbed her kit and walked toward the door. Celeste, wait. Julian started after her. Let her go, Richard said coldly. She's right about one thing. We don't need this scandal. Julian stopped, torn between the woman walking away and the board members watching him, waiting to see what he'd do. And in that moment of hesitation, Celeste saw everything she needed to know. She walked out the door. This time, she didn't look back. Julian stood alone in his office, staring at his mother's photograph on the desk. She looked back at him, her expression captured mid-laugh, full of life and conviction. What would you do? He asked her silently. But he already knew the answer. His mother would have burned the gallery to the ground before letting someone like Richard dictate who deserved dignity. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Board meeting in 1 hour. We need to discuss your future with the gallery. A threat, thinly veiled. Julian set down the phone and looked at the contract on his desk. The one that made him director, that gave him his mother's legacy, that came with so many strings he could barely breathe. He thought about Celeste. About the way she'd looked at him when she realized he wouldn't fight for her. About the years she'd spent punishing herself for a tragedy that wasn't her fault. About the courage it took for her to pick up a brush again. And about how he'd let her walk away. Twice. He picked up his phone and made a call. Art Forum? Hi, this is Julian Hale from the Hale Gallery. I have a story for you. 1 hour later, Julian stood in the gallery's main hall. The board members sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle, Richard at the center, arms crossed, expression smug. Julian, Richard began. We've discussed the situation and... I'm resigning, Julian said. Silence. What? Richard's smugness evaporated. Effective immediately. I'm stepping down as director. Julian's voice was steady, calm. But before I do, I'm holding a press conference. Right here. Right now. You can't. I can. And I am. He pulled out his phone. I've already invited every major art publication in the city. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Richard stood, his face flushing. Julian, if you do this, you'll ruin your career. Your mother's legacy. My mother's legacy, Julian interrupted, his voice sharp, was built on the idea that art belongs to everyone. That talent matters more than pedigree. That we honor the people who create and preserve beauty, regardless of who they are or where they come from. He looked Richard in the eye. You've turned her gallery into a club for people who think their money makes them better than everyone else. That's not her legacy. That's yours. And I won't be part of it anymore. You're making a mistake, Richard hissed. No, Julian said quietly. I'm finally doing the right thing. He walked out of the room, leaving the board members in stunned silence. 25 minutes later, the gallery was packed. Reporters, photographers, art critics, and curious onlookers filled every available space. Julian stood before the restored Madonna, microphone in hand, heart hammering. He scanned the crowd, hoping, praying that she'd come. But Celeste wasn't there. He swallowed his disappointment and began. Thank you all for coming. 2 nights ago, this painting, the Madonna in Repose, a 17th-century masterpiece, was nearly destroyed when a glass of champagne was spilled on it. The damage was catastrophic. Every expert we contacted said restoration would take weeks, maybe months. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. But there was one person who said she could save it. A woman working as a waitress at the gallery event. A black woman. When she offered to help, people laughed. When she insisted, she was thrown out. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. That woman was Celeste Armand. Gasps. Whispers exploded. For those who don't know, Celeste Armand is one of the greatest art restorers of our generation. She's worked with the Uffizi, the Louvre, the Met. She's saved paintings others declared unsalvageable. She disappeared 3 years ago after a personal tragedy, and she's been invisible ever since, working jobs where no one would recognize her, hiding in plain sight. Julian's voice cracked. Last night she came back. She worked through the night, alone, using skills most of us can only dream of possessing. And she saved this painting. He gestured at the Madonna. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted money. But because it's who she is. She heals broken things. He looked directly into the cameras. This gallery, and I, failed her. We let prejudice, fear, and pride blind us to who she really was. We made her feel invisible when she should have been celebrated. And I'm standing here today to say, I'm sorry. Celeste, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. You deserve better. You deserved better then, and you deserve better now. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. I'm resigning as director of the Hale Gallery, effective immediately. But before I go, I want to make one thing clear. Celeste Armand saved this painting. She saved this gallery's reputation. And she saved me from becoming someone I would have been ashamed to be. He set down the microphone as applause erupted. Tentative at first, then thunderous. Julian stepped back, his heart pounding, and scanned the crowd again. And then he saw her. Celeste stood at the back of the gallery, tears streaming down her face. She'd been watching from the doorway, invisible as always, when Julian started speaking. She'd planned to leave before anyone noticed her. But his words, raw, honest, unguarded, had rooted her in place. I see you. You deserve better. You saved me. The crowd parted as she walked forward, people whispering, recognizing her now. Cameras turned. But she didn't care. She only saw Julian. He met her halfway, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression open and vulnerable. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice breaking. I should have fought harder. I should have. You did fight, she interrupted softly. Just now. In front of everyone. It wasn't enough. It was everything. She took his hand, squeezed it. You risked everything for me. Your job, your reputation, your mother's gallery. None of that matters without doing what's right. Celeste smiled through her tears. Your mother would be proud. So would Amara. Her breath hitched. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, then at the Madonna behind them. The mother holding her child, whole again, alive again. I think you're right, she whispered. Julian cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. I see you, Celeste Armand. Not the tragedy. Not the waitress. Not the headlines. I see the woman who brings beauty back from the edge of destruction. The woman who taught me what courage really means. And I see you, she said, her voice trembling. The man who finally learned to fight for what matters. They stood there, foreheads touching, while cameras flashed and the crowd watched, transfixed. Then Celeste turned to face the painting. There's one more thing I need to do. She walked to her restoration kit, pulled out a tiny brush and a vial of paint. The crowd hushed, watching as she approached the Madonna. In the lower right corner, traditionally where artists sign their work, she painted 3 delicate letters: CA. Her initials. Her signature. Her reclamation. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at Julian. I'm not hiding anymore. The applause was deafening. 3 months later, the Hale Gallery had been transformed. Julian had negotiated with the board. He'd return as director only if they agreed to new terms: community programs, accessible pricing, partnerships with local artists. They'd agreed, desperate to salvage their reputation after the press conference went viral. And Celeste had her own studio again, not in the gallery basement, but in a sun-drenched space in Brooklyn, where she taught restoration to young artists who looked like her, who'd been told they didn't belong. Julian visited her there now, carrying coffee and watching her work on a damaged Rembrandt a collector had shipped from Amsterdam. You're staring again, she said without looking up, a smile playing at her lips. Can't help it. You're mesmerizing when you work. She set down her brush and turned to face him. Thank you. For staring. For seeing me. For fighting. For... She gestured around the studio. For all of this. Julian crossed to her, pulled her close. You did this. You reclaimed your life. We did this, she corrected, touching the bracelet she still wore every day. Together. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle, reverent, full of promise. Above them, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the paintings waiting to be healed, the brushes ready to create, the future unfolding in shades of gold. Celeste Armand had spent 3 years invisible, punishing herself for a tragedy she couldn't control. But now she was visible again. Whole again. Worthy again. And she was exactly where she belonged. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you stopped believing in yourself? Or maybe you were that person for someone else. Share your story below. These connections matter. Let's celebrate the people who help us find our way back. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.